We're ready to roll. Bring this meeting to order for the regular Port Authority meeting of June 19th. Next we have Elizabeth doing the land acknowledgement.
Kettle Creek Conservation Authority wishes to acknowledge the treaty and traditional lands originally occupied by the Indigenous First Nation peoples of the Anishinaabe, Potawatomi, and Haudenosaunee nations. It strives to build meaningful relationships with Indigenous communities and recognizes the importance of respecting these treaties and lands.
Thank you. We do have one addendum under new business, item D. It's listed, I believe, now. Next, I need a motion to sit as a hearing board. Secretary Jim and Laurie. All in favor? Motion carries. We do roll call now, please. Yes, we don't have because nobody on.
Sam is joining us online, so I would prefer to do the roll call. Grant Jones.
Yes.
Lori Baldwin Sands. Present. Jim Herbert.
Yes.
Sharon McMillan.
Yes.
Todd Noble.
Yes.
Jerry Cribble is absent. Frank Burrs is absent. John Strybosh.
Yes.
Sam Trousseau.
Hello, I'm here. I'm just trying to get set up.
Thank you.
We hear you, Sam.
John Wilson.
Here.
And Mr. Chair, we have 8 of 10 members present.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask if there are any declarations of conflict of interest. We'll proceed with the hearing. This is a hearing under section 28 of the Conservation Authorities Act in respect to an application by R.V. Anderson Associates Limited on behalf of the city of St. Thomas to undertake undergrades at the city St. Thomas Water Pollution Control Plant on 40359 Bush Line, St. Thomas, Ontario, involving improvements to odor control and restoring the rate of the plant capacity. Province of Ontario has made regulations under section 28 of the Conservation Authorities Act for the permission of the authority to development within an area regulated by the authority in order to ensure no adverse effect on the control of flooding, erosion, dynamic beaches, or pollution of the conservation of land, or to prevent alteration to a shoreline or water course or interference with wetland. Staff review this proposed work, and a copy of the staff report was given to the applicant. In accordance with section 2.2 of the KCCA's hearing, section 28 hearing procedures guideline and regulations approval officer deems that this application for development warrants a review by the authority for technical policy or information purposes. In holding this hearing, the authority board is to determine whether or not a permit is to be issued. In doing so, we can only consider the application in the form that is before us. The staff report such evidence that may be given and the submissions to be made on behalf of the applicant. The proceedings will be conducted according to the Statutory Powers Procedure Act. Under section 5 of the Canada Evidence Act, a witness may refuse to answer any question on the ground that the answer may tend to incriminate the person or may tend to establish his or her liability to a civil proceeding in the instance of the Crown or any person. Procedure in general shall be informal without the evidence before it being given under oath or affirmation. As the hearing proceeds, the procedures listed in the hearing procedure summary provided may be relaxed or abbreviated for efficiency. The authority may ask questions of the witnesses or clarification at any time. If the applicant has any questions to ask of the hearing board or the authority representative, they must direct to the chair of the board. I'll now ask KCA staff for the report. Joe, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to stand for convenience for the presentation. But what we have before you today is an application for improvements and upgrades to the St. Thomas Water Pollution Control Plant located at 40359 Bush Line in the city of St. Thomas. Thank you. So just as a quick summary, the water pollution control plant is located within a river or stream valley that's subject to flooding hazards under the regulatory storm event, which is the Hurricane Hazel flood standard, and it's subject to regulations under the Conservation Authorities Act. We recognize the facility has been in operation for over 100 years, and it was constructed in its current location prior to the hazard regulations and floodplain regulations. Our current policies are silent on the expansion of existing municipal infrastructure located within the floodplain and are based on the primary objective of directing new development to areas outside of hazardous lands. So for that reason, there's certain components of the application that are consistent with our floodplain policies and are beyond the authority of staff to issue the permit. So that's why it's been deemed to be reviewed by the hearing board for information, technical, and policy issues. With us today, we have Kevin Galibak, who's the Director of Environmental Infrastructure Services and the City Engineer for the City of St. Thomas, representing the applicant, and John Correll with RV Anderson Associates Limited, who is the agent who submitted the application on behalf of the city. On your screen is the general location map. As you can see, the existing plant is located within the valley lands of Kettle Creek, right at the outlet of Southville Creek that outlets into Kettle. And it's fully within the regulation limit under the Conservation Authorities Act. And the blue area on the map to the left represents the limits of our floodplain mapping based on the Hurricane Hazel flood standard. Under existing conditions, you can see the northern portion of the property is the primary water control plant facility. And on the southern portion of the property, there is some existing sludge storage and treatment buildings and structures, and those are just photographs taken from Google Street View to get an understanding of the current conditions. So what we have in the application is a proposed development activity that entails two projects. One is referred to as the aerated storage project, which involves construction of 2 buildings and 2 storage tanks on the property. And the second project being referred to as the ICIP upgrade project that deals with improvements to an existing facility located with the sewage treatment plant, and what does involve also a new building to be constructed in the floodplain. When we look at the, this is the location of the aerated storage facility, the 2 new buildings and the new tanks. The general area is highlighted in red on the aerial photograph to the left. It's currently vacant lands on the property where those new structures are proposed. Included in the advanced.
I'm just gonna go through the chair. So you go back to the other diagram, Joel. One you just had up. Can you go up to the screen and just, I can't read all that print and just clarify?
Yeah, sure, Jim. So this was a figure that was in the engineering study submitted in the application that's just labeling all of the existing facilities located on the property. So you have your main plant 2 and 3 of the main facility here and some existing sewage treatment. So I guess if you had further details of what's existing, I may refer that to John and Kevin to answer.
So the red outlines, but that's where you want to go?
That's the area where they're proposing the aerated storage tanks and new buildings on this vacant parcel of land.
And this, the city is doing this?
Correct.
Correct. And there's no input from the Kettle Creek on that?
That's what we're going through today.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
so they're proposing the new development
Proposing,
application.
okay.
Yeah.
Good.
So in your advanced package, we did provide the full submission, so there was a full set of engineered drawings relative to those proposed buildings and the 2 new storage tanks. When we look at the hazardous lands, here's a situation where when we look at the south portion of the property, it is an area that's less susceptible to flooding. Based on the slope profile, you can see that the land is above the 100-year flood level, but is susceptible to approximately 0.5 meters of flood water under the Hurricane Hazel standard. And the access to the south portion of the property comes off Bush Line, as shown on the aerial photography there, and it's also under some pretty deep depths of flood water during a flood event to that scale. We also have considerations for erosion hazard limits. As we can see, there is some active erosion that's occurring along the banks of Southville Creek and Kettle Creek, immediately adjacent to where these facilities are proposed. When we look at how we define erosion hazard limits, we rely on the provincial technical guide. In this situation, we look at co-erosion allowance, stable slope, and then erosion access allowance. And there are guidelines in that technical document to determine those setbacks in absence of geotechnical engineering, and I'll speak to that in a minute on the presentation. The city and RVA have done an assessment to confirm that all of the buildings are located outside of the total erosion allowance and the stable slope allowance. The buildings are set back out of what you would call more imminent risk concerns in absence of geotechnical engineering, so it meets the minimum guidelines of the technical guide. However, it is identified that there is an essential corridor for sludge movement of vehicles that would be within that area, located within potential for long-term erosion risks. As I mentioned, our policies are silent on the expansion of existing municipal infrastructures and floodplain policies, and they're primarily based on directing new development away. So there are components with our existing policies that wouldn't be consistent with the application or beyond the ability of staff to deal with. That's primarily dealing with new buildings and structures located in the flood hazard and the ability to provide safe ingress or egress to those new structures. There are components that have met our floodplain policies, however, that is located on the less hazardous portion of the property. Those buildings have been flood-proof to the regulatory storm event, so through raising the finished floor of the foundation, addressing hydrostatic uplift, and using watertight doors or seals to prevent water entering these buildings. And I would clarify, these buildings are only for maintenance and storage, so they're not habitable buildings. There's no office space or things like that in them. And as well, from staff's opinion, that they would exhibit a lesser threat to life or property damage due to flooding than the existing facility that's already there in the floodplain. Looking at the erosion hazard management policies, as I mentioned, the buildings and structures have been demonstrated that they're outside of those erosion allowances in absence of geotechnical slope stability assessments, but they did identify an essential component of the access road located within those concerned areas. Jumping over to the ICIP upgrades. Again, these are dealing with an existing facility that's already located in the southern portion of the property, generally where the red box is shown here. They're looking at doing improvements to existing facility, a new, I believe, an underground structure here, and then a new building that's proposed in that section of the property. Again, full engineered construction drawings and details were submitted in the application and provided in your advanced package. When we look at the flooding risks, this is the area of the property that's at higher flood degree risk. Under a Hurricane Hazel standard, there's upwards of 4.5 meters of flood water, so it's very, very deep waters. There is a historical flood protection berm that's been constructed around the plant that does provide flood protection up to the 100-year storm. So again, we do have existing policies that deal with replacement or reconstruction of existing facilities. However, they require flood proofing to the regulatory flood standard, which is not feasible in this case due to the significant depths that are existing there. Safe ingress and egress, again, they currently don't have that. And this proposal includes one new building in the floodplain that wouldn't be consistent with our current floodplain policies. However, I do want to recognize some historical and additional considerations. So historically, it has been accepted that the 100-year storm is the maximum level of floodproofing mitigation that's feasible for the plant. And they do have a flood protection berm there that provides the protection to that level. And the ICP upgrade project, in our opinion, would maintain the same level of threat to life and property damage due to flooding and does not adversely affect floodplain management considerations beyond the current impacts of the plant that exists today. So just a quick summary, the existing wastewater control plant is located upon hazardous lands that are subject to flooding. It does have protection to mitigate flooding up to the 100-year storm event. The essential road access is located within erosion allowances. But again, our board policies are silent on expansion. Therefore, when we look at our primary objective of directing new development away, there's those few components that aren't consistent with our current policies. I can also confirm the aerated storage project is located above the 100-year storm elevation. It's incorporated floodproofing to the regulatory storm. The ICP upgrade project maintains the same level of flood protection to the 100-year storm with the protection berm that's existing. Again, we believe it maintains the same level of threat to life and property that exists with the current plant. It's been in place prior to natural hazard regulations, and we acknowledge and understand that it's a significant municipal infrastructure that's required to continue operations to make improvements for the overall health and benefit of the community and the general public. So as a board, the primary objectives that we look at when we're issuing permits is under Ontario Regulation 4124, you may issue a permit for an activity that would otherwise be prohibited if in your opinion, it's not likely to affect the control of flooding, erosion, dynamic beaches, or unstable soil or bedrock, and not likely to create conditions or circumstances that in the event of a natural hazard might jeopardize the health or safety of persons or result in damage or destruction of property. The provincial policy statement and technical guides is another governing document that outlines that the primary objective is to direct development and site alterations to locations outside of hazardous lands where there's an unacceptable risk to public health and safety or property damage and not create new or aggravate existing hazards. So the primary basis is to get development out, but here we have a situation with a significant piece of municipal infrastructure that's already located within. It needs to move forward with development for improvements and upgrades. So in terms of options for the board, what you need to consider today is whether you are supportive of the application, but you have the option to deny the application for non-compliance with KCCA floodplain management policies. You may consider granting issuance of the permit based on the materials submitted, and you also have the authority to consider adding conditions if you're going to issue the permit. Staff is recommending that if the board is in a position to grant permission to allow the development to proceed, we are recommending two conditions that have been discussed with the applicants prior to the report. One would be that the City of St. Thomas develop and provide a monitoring plan to KCCA for active erosion occurring along Kettle Creek and Mill Creek adjacent to the aerated storage project to identify future triggers for potential enactment of the city for erosion control mitigation measures prior to impacts on operations. We're asking the monitoring plan be prepared to the satisfaction of KCCA and be completed at least 60 days before the expiry of the permit. So we know there's active erosion there. The buildings are set back to be safe, but to address that hazard component, we're asking for a monitoring plan to work with the city to correct those issues when they become more imminent risk. And secondly, which is consistent with KCCA's floodproofing requirements for where there is development that can't meet floodproofing to the regulatory storm, that the corporation of the City of St. Thomas sign a release and indemnity agreement to release and forever discharge the Kettle Creek Conservation Authority from any claim or loss, damage, injury, or otherwise caused by or arising from any natural occurrences to the operation and use of the aerated storage facility and the ICPI upgrades, including but not limited to flooding hazards or erosion hazards. And that ends my presentation of the staff report. I'm happy to answer any questions, or after that, I'll turn it over to John or Kevin if there's any questions of them as well.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Are there any questions from the board members? Scott, go ahead. Todd?
Through you, Chair. Joe, the erosion, how big of an issue is that? And if it becomes a problem, how costly would it be? And how enforceable is it for KCCA to make that happen?
Yeah, I think what I can say is there's some evidence of active erosion that's occurring there that's common along the ravine of Kettle Creek, especially where there's an outlet from Mill Creek. I think from some representations of city staff who manage the water pollution control plant, that it's been like that for some time. So it's not actively moving right now, but there's evidence of past. And I think that's why we're supportive of the setbacks, but wanting to have something in place that at least it's being monitored and there's a trigger to identify when is the time that a geotechnical engineer needs to come out and assess the impacts to the plant. I think the city's committed to do whatever they need to do to ensure that plant remains in place and is protected. But we're suggesting a monitoring plan to help kind of guide that forward rather than trying to address the erosion at this point, because I'd say the concern isn't imminent at this stage.
Thank you.
Jim, go ahead.
To the chair, and it's probably going to end up, Joe, to Kevin. There's two conditions that the city needs to agree to. And I think this is all good. I think this is really a positive step for us. I mean, I know there's gray areas for Kettle Creek, but sometimes we have to take a step back and look what's best in the long term. So I'd be happy to hear if this is the time, Kevin, will the city agree to those two recommended conditions that are listed up there?
Do you want to wait for questions of staff and then?
We need to wait for that one, Jim. Just to allow for them to respond.
Yeah, that's, I know. That was just my question. That time, whenever it can be answered.
Any other questions? Not seeing any other questions. Do the applicant or the agent have any comments at this time? Go ahead, Kevin.
I can address the board member's question if you'd like. The city is agreeable to these two conditions. A monitoring program is really a preventative maintenance measure, where we'll go in and monitor the active erosion. As Joe had indicated, we need that access road to be maintained. So if there's any further erosion to the point where our access road is starting to become compromised, we need to act. So this is a good preventative maintenance measure anyway. So we don't really have any concerns with that. The indemnity and release agreement is with legal counsel. I was hoping to hear back beforehand, but I don't see any issues. It seems pretty standard type of liability waiver claim for this type of work. So I don't foresee any issues with that.
So the chair, just to follow, so if there's every time any problems that you recognize or you recognize, do you actually contact each other before you decide what has to be done, or you just go ahead and do it because it's in the city?
Through the chair to, is it board member?
No, that's fine. Yes.
Okay, Councillor. No, we would continue to work in concert with the KCCA because we'd still need a permit in order to do any works within the regulated
Okay.
area. So we'd still need to work with staff. And I might add, for everyone's knowledge, that working with Joe and Elizabeth has been a real treat. And particularly for this application. So it's much better than other conservation authorities I've been with. So I wanted to say thanks to Joe and Elizabeth for that.
Well, that's good, because you don't want to have a deal breaker and fight about it for a long time.
Yeah, it's not worth it.
You know, no, not worth it, but I like that communication between the two, so thank you.
Any other further comments from?
If you didn't prepare a presentation or anything, you're just here to field any questions if you had any.
Are there any further questions from members of the board?
It's just
Go ahead, John.
common sense prevails in a pre-existing outfit, so good.
Good for us, I think, good for everybody.
Any further questions from board members or comments? Seeing that. I don't believe there's any interested parties here that want to comment. I don't think Betsy or Grant are here for that. So I don't assume there's any rebuttals since there's no concerns. And I'll ask the hearing board members if there are any further questions from that staff or applicant at this time. If not, I need a motion to go into closed session to deliberate. Lori moves, seconder, Todd. All in favor?
Sorry, I do need to call
Oh, sorry.
the vote. Grant Jones,
Yes.
Lori Baldwin Sands.
Yes.
Jim Herbert,
Yes.
Sharon McMillan,
Yes.
Todd Noble.
Yes.
John Strybosh,
Yes.
Sam Trudeau,
Yes.
John Wilson,
Yes.
and you're going into closed at 10:23.
It's scary. So I need a motion to come out of closed session. Todd and Sharon. Call the vote, please.
Baldwin Sands.
Yes.
Jim Herbert,
Yes.
Sharon McMillan.
Yes.
Todd Noble.
Yes.
John Strybosh. Sam Trudeau.
Yes.
John Wilson.
Yes.
Grant Jones.
Yes.
And that motion passes. You're out of closed session.
Thank you. So upon the decision of the board, we've made a decision to approve with conditions. Condition one, that the city of St. Thomas develop and provide a monitoring plan, ACCA, to activate for active erosion occurring along Kettle Creek and Mill Creek, adjacent to the aerated storage project, to identify future triggers for potential enactment by the city or city of erosion control mitigation measures prior to impacts upon operations. Monitoring plan shall be prepared to the satisfaction of KCCA and completed at least 60 days before the expiry of the permit. And number two, that the corporation of the city of St. Thomas sign and release and to release and forever discharge the Kettle Creek Conservation Authority from any claims or loss. damage, injury, or otherwise caused by or arising from the natural occurrences to the operation and the use of the area of the storage facility. And ICIP upgrades, which including but not limited to flooding hazards and erosion hazards. I wish to inform you that in accordance with section 28.1-8 of if you object to any of these conditions, you may within 15 days submit a request to the minister for the minister to review this authority's decision or appeal the decision to the local planning appeal tribunal. Further details can be found within sections 28.1 of the Conservation Authorities Act. Thank you.
So now, Mr. Chair, I just ask that we have a motion that the Board of Directors adjourn from sitting as a hearing board.
Need a motion, please? Jim and Sharon, call the vote, please.
Sorry. Baldwin Sands.
Yes.
Jim Herbert.
Yes.
Sharon McMillan.
Yes.
Todd Noble.
Yes.
John Strybosh.
Yes.
Sam Trudeau.
Yes.
John Wilson.
Yes.
Grant Jones.
Yes.
And that motion passes.
Thank you. We'll go back to the regular meeting. First, we have minutes from the meeting of May 15th. Any errors or omissions? If not, I need a recommendation is to adopt. Anyone second, please? Jim?
On the motion, Baldwin Sands.
Yes.
Jim Herbert.
Yes.
Sharon McMillan.
Yes.
Todd Noble.
Yes.
John Strybosh.
Same. I wasn't there.
Yeah.
Sam Trudeau.
Yes.
John Wilson.
Yes.
Grant Jones.
Yes,
And that motion passes.
thank you. Moving down to matters arising. First is a meeting report from Mary Ann. Go ahead, Mary Ann.
So just wanted to highlight, the Elgin and Kettle Creek Agricultural Scholarship is still accepting submissions. Applicants are encouraged to apply by August 15th. And also wanted to kind of highlight some of the great conversations happening over social media, this past weekend at Dan Patterson Conservation Area, which I'm sure Elizabeth will go into further, just, folks highlighting the perfect event space and how enjoyable being out at Dan Patterson was this past weekend at the Kettle Creek Food Truck Festival. And, you know, reminding folks that the grounds are available to rent. So for both events and private family functions.
Any questions from Mary Ann? Comments? I know I stood there for about 3-4 hours directing traffic, and holy moly, it was this. I've never seen something like, we had that grounds full of cars. It's I think your initial estimate's about 2,500 people over 6-7 hours. It was really, really busy. And if you weren't there by 2 o'clock, you probably didn't get what you wanted.
That was a lot of things.
I agree, it was substantial. Were you on stage?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I missed you.
Got my silence here.
We were looking for you. But I will say that it was great to run into neighbors I hadn't seen in 25 years. So it was an amazing event and the crowds were absolutely wonderful, but to reconnect with neighbors was really important. And I really thank Kettle Creek for making that opportunity.
I got to see a lot of license plates, and the furthest that I could see was Connecticut.
Very cool.
Good.
I'd like to congratulate Mary Ann on how far this project has come. Like before this event, we were doing the trivia nights, right? And to see how far this has grown, this is pretty awesome.
Good.
Just want to make a comment, that picture on the bottom there, that entire group there, that's well drillers from Blenheim. And I put it on my Facebook page like a month ago that the food truck festival was on, and they came up with the whole family, so it's the fingers get out there, so it's sort of neat.
One of our first motorcycles that rolled in, lady from Kincard by herself, And she saw it on Facebook or Instagram or something, I'm not sure, she decided that's where she's gonna drive.
That's my
I'll be
hobby.
down for the,
That's great.
Good job.
okay, there's nothing else, we'll move on to project tracking.
Mr. Chair, so yeah, again, just highlighting the food truck festival and the kudos to staff. Mary Ann certainly leading it on behalf of the trust, but a lot goes into it, even with the field staff preparing the grounds the day before and making sure the grounds are still in good condition for a large family picnic that happened the next day. So all around a great event, and Mary Ann attracted $13,000 in fundraising, but what we like about the food truck festival is just what you mentioned, is the far-reaching good communications and good outreach into the community that it's generating. Betsy and her youth corps have also hosted 2 events during the month of May. 14 students are participating in the youth corps this year, so good turnout for that program as well. They've been planting trees and wildflower plugs in the watershed. The tree planting crew finished up their year by May 31st, and despite the wet season, it was a good year for tree planting, and they had an excellent crew as well, which makes a difference when you're planting 30,000 trees. And the pools will be opening June 28th in time for Canada Day, and pool staff orientation wrapped up this week. So another tick off the list of things to do for the campgrounds and a successful season.
Questions?
I wondered if this, through the chair, if this event was so successful, the food truck, is it something that you might plan on an ongoing basis, or depends?
It's, Mr. Chair, to Sharon, it's the kind of the lead fundraiser for the trust, and I think this is this was the third year. And I would say it doubled both in attendance over last year. So I think it is something that they will continue.
Word spreads.
Yeah.
We may need more manpower
Yes.
next year.
Grant might need relief in the parking lot.
Okay, nothing else, we'll move down to watershed conditions. Then here you
I
go.
believe Jen is online. She might have got back on. Yep, there she is.
Hi, Jen, go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Just a quick watershed conditions report today. Water levels are fluctuating. We got a lot of rain in May, probably about 123% above normal for May. So as a result, none of the CAs in the Southern Ontario region are showing low water conditions. And we were lucky to help about 120 snapping turtle eggs this year to be incubated off-site from nests that were unsafe.
Thanks, Jen. Any questions for Jen? I think everybody realized it was really wet. At least the farmers did. Okay, if there's nothing else, recommendation of staff reports, matters arising A through C be received. Lori, John? Call the vote, please.
Baldwin Sands.
Yes.
Herbert. McMillan.
Yes.
Noble.
Yes.
Strybosh.
Yes.
Rousseau. Sam.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Wilson.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
And that motion passes.
Yeah. Next, items of correspondence, first one from, Honorable Sylvia Jones, Minister of Health, regarding, phase out of free water testing. I believe, want to speak to this, Elizabeth?
Mr. Chair, it was just our response back to, based on the direction that from the last meeting, you asked me to draft a letter, and so that's just a response that put out. We also have the notice of proposed zoning for the city of St. Thomas that we received June 5th, 2024. And I think if the will of the board, Joe just has a couple of comments on that circulation.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Jim, did you have a?
I was gonna ask a question if Joe wants to say something first. Go ahead.
No, Joe should go.
So as we received the notice, the MZO order that's been issued by the province for the Volkswagen Giga plant, which is primarily changing all of the current designations aside from a natural heritage woodlot on the property to industrial land development. We thought maybe just a quick summary, if I can see the next slide, Mary Ann, and one more click. Just to quickly provide a little bit of update on KCCA's involvement in this. This currently in orange is the industrial lands development area. And what you may not realize is that the watershed boundary between Catfish and Kettle splits this development area. So only 1/3 of the development is actually in Kettle Creek and 2/3 is in Catfish Creek. So based on the MZO order, we don't anticipate submitting any comments. There are powers in that zoning where they're going to remove hazard lands and water features. But as you can see from this map, that's primarily occurring in the Catfish Creek watershed. They've got a couple hazard designations here and a water feature to the south. There is a water feature in Kettle that cuts across this way, but the majority of that no longer meets the definition of a water course under the regulation. It was primarily drainage swales. The only area of the regulation that applies to the development is an open channel water course west of the railway that provides outlet up Highbury Ave to a culvert and a drain just south of the Tim Hortons there. So although there's certain powers in the MZO that the city can change drainage patterns and remove water features, that's not necessarily happening in the Kettle Creek watershed. And through review of the servicing studies for the Yarmouth Yards development, we are happy to see that the city is generally respecting that watershed line. So there are 2 stormwater management ponds in the Catfish area that's going to maintain the flow towards Catfish, with one pond or a series of a 2-tiered pond in the Kettle Creek watershed to manage the surface water going to Kettle. So although it is an MZO order that's forcing us into industrial lands, we've been working with the city staff that are involved with the project, and we're satisfied that they are meeting the respective of our comments in our jurisdiction, and that we don't really see any concerns with the MZO with regard to the Kettle Creek watershed. So we just thought we'd give a quick update on that process as a result of that notification.
Jim, did you have?
Yeah, sure. I thought I read somewhere or indicated that the government wasn't going to, they're going to let you continue free water testing.
Yes, they backed up.
But it doesn't seem to be indicated
No.
any follow-up on the letter here. So, okay, so it is.
My understanding is that they backed off.
Okay.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Todd.
That picture that you just showed, Joe, could I get a copy of that? That's not in our minutes, is it?
No, sorry. So
Yeah.
the first picture was the notice. This is the second one. If you click the link on the notice, it took you to a webpage with a plan and justification report.
Oh,
But I can
Oh,
we can certainly circulate the planning justification report out to the board. That was just a screenshot from the plan justification report.
gotcha.
That's good.
Just interesting where the boundary happens to be.
Yeah.
Split there.
Okay, anything further? Not a recommendation to receive the correspondence?
Move it.
Jim and Sharon, got her hand up?
Mhm.
John, get John in there, trying to.
Bald-
Call the roll, please.
Baldwin Sands.
Yes,
Herbert,
Yes.
McMillan. Yes. Noble,
Yes.
Stribosh.
Yes.
Trousseau, yes.
Yes.
Wilson.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
That motion passes.
Moving down to new business, first is Dalewood Dam seasonal inspection. I think Jen is doing this one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick update with the seasonal inspections that we do on the Dalewood Dam. This last inspection was done on June 4th. No changes to the upstream wing walls, both the north and the south upstream wing walls. However, deterioration and spalling continues on the downstream wing walls, about 0.5 meter square on the north downstream and 0.25 meter square on the south downstream. The spillway wasn't inspected due to flowing water. We may revisit that later on this year. Wing walls, again, with the deterioration that's been noticed, should still be completed repairs in 1 to 5 years. spalling on the spillway and piers should be completed within 1 year. That's still the main issue of deterioration.
Thanks, Jen. Any questions for Jen? Jim, go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. But when I came on this board, I don't know, 4 years ago, whatever it was, you keep seeing reports that recommend complete within 1 to 5 years. So here we go again, 5 years later, within 1 to 5 years. Are we ever going to do anything? Do we ever budget anything? Like take a 5-year plan and budget it? Or are we just going to keep paying these people money to tell us to recommend to do something to the bridge within 1 to 5 years? Anyway, just my comment. It's constant year after year. We see the same report, basically deteriorating 1 to 5 years. So I just think we should do something about it and not just keep getting report every year until all of a sudden that one side collapses and they'll say, we've been telling you to do something with it. Anyway, just my comment. It's just frustrating to see this report. We pay them year after year to tell us the same thing within 1 to 5 years. My comment, just my personal comment only. So anyway, I don't know what's going to happen with it.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, through Jim, as I've mentioned before, I think the authority is being good dam managers. This is part of it. We're doing constant monitoring of the dam to monitor for continued deterioration at the same time as that we're working through the process to determine what the best option is for the dam moving forward. I know you've expressed your frustration before, but a dam is not something that we just decide what to do with overnight. It is a long process filled of studies so that we make sure that we're making the right decision for the piece of infrastructure, but also for the community and the people and organizations that are paying for it. So I recognize the frustration, but I do think the authority is taking the appropriate steps to handle this effectively, efficiently, and with good financial management.
Go ahead, follow up through the chair. So if we decided today to do something, what would the estimated cost to repair that dam and to make it right? Is there?
I think the study, Mr. Chair, through Jim to you, the options assessment that the authority had last year basically came down, gave you those cost estimates. So a complete rebuild of the dam and the condition that it is that meets the standards is $4 million. To do either a major rehabilitation or build the dam at more of a modified level, you're looking at anywhere as 2 million. So we're not talking just small fixes here. We're talking big ticket items that we need to make sure that we're making the proper decision before we go in there. So
just thought, so are we responsible for the total cost? Is there nothing from the ministry that we can apply to and get three-quarters of the funding for it?
Yep, through you to the chair to Jim, there's the WECI program as we've discussed before, and the next report speaks to that. The WECI program does support with 50% cost for most of these projects. However, the limiting factor there is that there's $5 million in that coffer, and it's shared through a competitive process with all the other CAs in the province.
So
again, it goes back to making sure that we're making a sound, reasoned decision before we apply to that program, because it is a competitive process.
I just look at eventually one day, it may not be this board, is going to have to, they're going to say, these guys are going to say, time to replace it. It may be 5 million now, then it'll be 8 million, but anyway, that's fine. You know how I feel about it. I just keep saying, we keep paying these people every year to do this, $35,000, and we get the same basic report, slight deterioration, get anywhere at 1 to 5 years. I've said my piece. Thank you very much for your comments.
It comes down to, if we ever do get a WECI, it's probably not going to be 50% of the project. It's going to be whatever little chunk of the money we get.
Yeah.
At that point, we have to decide whether to pull the trigger and where is that money coming from. It could be to million, it could be 3 million that we have to find.
$5, I understand.
And I think if we add that to the levy, there's gonna be some really upset people. And so it's a matter of how do we raise levy enough to make that money in 10 years, or it's, that's a decision for the board, but I know what the province is, leaning towards when we increase levies, they want to see justification for it. Well, I guess a dam break, maybe justification.
I guess that's what you're saying, if it breaks. Anyway,
Anyway, is there any other
Yeah.
questions? Go ahead, John.
Yeah, just a comment to the chair. I'm new here, so, and I was informed about the dam, and so the other day I went and I had a hike around the water, that beautiful, amazing area, and that's a lot. It really, it's an important feature, and so, yeah, it's a good thing, and I think we have to, it would be really sad if we just lost the reservoir. Yeah.
I totally agree. John?
So is this something that we basically approach our municipalities with and say, hey, this is coming, we need to start building a reserve for it, and that's why we're asking for an increase to build a reserve. That way it's not one big hit when we do get to the point where it has to happen. I don't know if that's.
In all likelihood, unless there's some sort of grant that comes out from the feds or the province, that's probably and ultimately what's going to happen. I know, I think Sam's still here, but the City of London has made it very clear about their expectations for increases. Them being the ones that'll fund most of this, it's going to be a challenge, and I'm sure there's going to be some very difficult discussions over this in the future.
yeah, through the chair, I would think before you would do that, you'd have to get a price, what it is to get quote on it to be able to ban, to replace it, and then start asking municipalities, it's $1 million, can you put this share, you put this share? It's hard for a municipality to budget anything if you don't know what the cost is. Anyway,
But on the cheap end, it's 2 million.
yeah.
On the expensive end, it's 4.
Yeah.
How many years down? It'll be 5 or 6.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate the comments and stuff, and we've had multiple discussions around the board level about this, and that's why we went to that options assessment last year. We kind of know what the options are. We're moving towards that environmental assessment this year to jump right to whether it's a replacement or not a replacement and getting ahead of ourselves. We do, that's what I'm talking about. It's a process. We have to take those steps to first decide, what is the best option for the dam. Then we get into those other discussions about how to finance it. And there's no doubt that the finance of this capital project is going to need strong partnerships. And that's what staff is working towards behind the scenes as well.
It's good.
Through the chair to Elizabeth, is WIFI the only source where you can go for assistance on other organizations?
I mean, that,
You can apply.
yeah, Mr. Chair, to Sharon, I think that's where the partnership building has to come up with a member municipality. Certainly WECI is available to us as CAs, but depending on that choice of what we do with the dam that will come out of the EEA, then we're looking at different options in terms of partnerships or other funding sources other than WECI. Mr. Chair, I think Sam has his hand up.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Sam.
It's okay. It was just a side comment. I'm good.
Okay, thanks, Sam. There's nothing else. Recommendation is that the attached Dalewood Dam Seasonal Inspection Report dated June 4th, 2024 from JD Valley be received.
So moved.
John and Sam?
Baldwin Sands.
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
McMillan,
Yes.
Noble.
Yes.
Strybosh.
Yes.
Trousseau,
Yes.
Wilson,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes,
and that motion passes.
thank you. Got to recognize, we've got 2 Johns at the table now. Again, has to differentiate,
The real job.
New John, old John. Okay, we'll move on to item B, WECI program update. Go ahead, Jen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This just builds on the last report. At the February 7th full authority meeting, the board approved staff's application to the WECI program for funding for the Dalewood Dam environmental assessment study. So the call for WECI applications came on June 3rd, and we were able to submit a year one study for the environmental assessment project for a total project cost of $34,000. With a successful WECI application, that would be $17,000 from KCCA and $17,000 from the WECI program. New for this year, the WECI program has gone into multi-year projects. So that being said, each project still has to be completed in the fiscal year. So year one projects would have to be completed by March 31st, 2025, and year two projects would have to be completed by March 31st, 2026. But with an extra twist is that both projects had to be submitted by June 3rd this year. So based on that information, we also submitted an application for a year two project for design and tender of the completed EA for a total project cost of $40,000, which again would be 50%. A successful WECI application would provide 50% of that funding. If we didn't apply for that second year project, then there was the potential that we wouldn't be able to apply again to WECI until after 2026. So it was imperative that we got that application in with the hope that we had a successful EA at the end of year one. Each year had an available funding of $5 million, but again, it's a competitive process. So the funds are not guaranteed, but we had to submit an application in hope that we would be successful. And again, funds that are spent within the first year can't be transferred to the second year, and we wouldn't have a chance to apply again until after 2026.
Any questions, Dan? Makes it a little more challenging when you're applying for 2 years.
Mr. Chair, I would just add that they've touted these changes as a benefit to the CAs, especially for large projects like a dam decommission or a big dam rehabilitation that you can do a multi-year ask, which is something that a lot of CAs have been asking for. But the assumption is that you wouldn't have to do 2 years of funding. You could have one project proposal that has 2 years components to it, and you'd be approved for those 2 years. This has severely complicated the process, and I think what is going to be happening is that a lot of CAs are going to be putting placeholders into the year two with no intention really of, I wouldn't say intention of, but not solid sounding on whether the year two project is going ahead. And so what we hope, or what I think the CAs will be asking for, is that they have constant meetings for reallocations of those funds, and that you can resubmit projects that have actually occurred, so that you can access funds that may not have got spent from CA saying that they're going to undertake a project and that didn't. But it's definitely not, they've touted it as a positive, but I see it complicating things far more than I think what their intention was. And the result is we're now sitting in June and we still don't have a WECI response on proposals, which is going to upset and be difficult for a lot of CAs to get these projects done as well by the end of the year. So stay tuned. What staff wanted to update you on today is we know we had reported before that we were going to be putting out that WECI application for year one. We ended up having to apply for year two. And we're sitting in June and still haven't heard back from the WECI committee. So my recommendation today is that the staff report and the WECI program update and submission be received, and further that the executive committee be given the power to act on the Dalewood Dam EA project until the next scheduled full authority meeting. I'm not comfortable pulling the trigger on processing that EA process until we have a broader discussion with the board about the WECI program, the EA process, and how we move forward from here. And I'm just worried that some of that might move between now and August. So that's why I would ask for that power to be given to the executive committee. And if needed, I can call a meeting of that executive committee in that time gap between now and then.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or concerns? Doesn't get any easier around here.
Sam raised his hand there.
Oh, Sam, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna move that.
Okay. So Sam moves recommendation, seconder, John W. Any further discussion?
Baldwin Sands,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
McMillan,
Yes.
Noble,
Yes.
Strybosh,
Yes.
Trousseau,
Yes.
Wilson,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
And that motion carries.
Okay, next item C, Conservation Authority SAC update.
I'll take it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So staff continue to work on the mandatory deliverables of changes to the Conservation Authorities Act. So the first one is the land inventory, where basically we were to assemble data on all properties that we own or control. That is an internal document that doesn't need to be circulated for public consultation or posted publicly to our website. So that document is nearing completion currently. And then the next one is the conservation areas strategy. So if you recall, at our previous meeting, we talked about the watershed-based resource management strategy. This is another required strategy that looks at our conservation area properties. And within that document, we have to identify objectives to inform decision-making on our properties, the programs and services provided on the lands, how our lands augment natural heritage, designate our lands based on various land use categories, and have a process to review, update, and consult on that. Next slide.
You want a question on that? Sure, sure, to the chair. So Beth, when you talk about national heritage, yes, are you talking tree planting and that, is that what you mean in that?
It's the natural systems of our properties, wetlands, trees, forests, all those things. Like basically encompass the natural.
Because I know you plant a lot of trees, right? But is there a follow-up year after year to see? I mean, I'll just go to Lake Margaret. One year you planted all those things. Is there a follow-up to see they actually grew or?
Yes, with our tree planting program, survival assessments are part of that process so that we can monitor the success of the sites.
Thank you.
So today, we're just beginning to develop that conservation area strategy, and the first step of that is establishing the objectives for inclusion in the strategy. And so before you today and in the advanced package, we have 4 categories of objectives. The first is land securement and management, and that includes securing and managed lands that support our programs and services. Utilizing income generated from our lands to offset operational expenses and other programs and services. Identifying opportunities to augment our, the natural heritage features in the watershed or to integrate with other provincially or municipally owned lands. And disposing only of lands as needed when there's no negative impact to provincially significant features or ecologically significant lands. The next category is environmental protection and biodiversity enhancement. Once again, this is respect to our own lands. So design and managing our properties to ensure that they remain valuable assets and can handle and adapt to the pressures and challenges of population growth and climate change. Protecting and restoring our habitats that are critical for wildlife, including wetlands, forests, grasslands, and aquatic ecosystems. Monitoring and controlling invasive species on our properties to protect native biodiversity, supporting the scientific research community to better understand local ecosystems by giving them access to our properties and continuing ourselves to monitor the health of our natural heritage system and the effectiveness of conservation measures. The next category relates to public access to our properties and recreation. So objectives include designing and managing our lands to provide access to quality and sustainable active and passive recreation. Advancing inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility on our own and managed lands, developing and enhancing our land holdings to provide connectivity with municipalities or other existing features within the watershed. And lastly, community engagement and collaboration. We want to increase knowledge about the importance of conservation through programs and events we do. Encourage community involvement in our conservation efforts through volunteer and stewardship opportunities, and work with government agencies, nonprofits, academic institutions, private sector partners, and communities to achieve our conservation goals. So today we're just looking for your approval in principle of these draft objectives, and then they would be posted to our website for public consultation. Any feedback we receive will basically go into the development of that draft strategy over the coming months, and then that strategy will be brought back to the board for final approval. So you can see the recommendation before you today is that the staff report on the Conservation Authorities Act update, land inventory and conservation area strategy be received. And further, that the draft objectives for the conservation area strategy be approved for posting to KCCA's website for public consultation.
Thanks, Okay, thanks, Betsy. Any questions or concerns? Good report. Yeah, I think it's a great first step. Mary Ann? Oh, I'm sorry, Sam, go ahead.
Is there anything in all of this that we're not doing anyway? Is there anything new here that the province is adding to our ability to properly service our lands and our people?
Through the chair to you, Sam. No, I think what we've come up with here is basically putting on paper all those things we already do with our lands. So I wouldn't say anything new. It's just basically allowing us to still continue to do what we do.
Okay.
Any other questions? If not, the recommendations before you need to move in second, please. Move it. Jim?
Waldron Sands,
Yes.
Jim Herbert,
Yes.
McMillan,
Yes.
Noble,
Yes.
Strybosh,
Yes.
Trousseau,
Yes.
Wilson,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
and that motion passes.
Thank you. And to our addendum item, Dale, go ahead, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Recently at Galewood main washroom, we've identified some issues with the existing septic system. So the septic system, the main washroom, was put in the late 1980s. It's a 3-tank, 2-field bed system, and portions of the one septic field bed is not functioning. So we've had a certified septic installer come out and do an inspection. Replacement cost of a septic system of that size is quite costly. As an interim, he believes that there's enough system there, that by doing some modifications of adding some riser lids and redirecting some pipes, that we can continue to operate, but would be required to annually remove the sludge out of the tanks so that we can keep the washroom facility open while we plan and potentially budget for future septic system, whether it's full replacement or partial. This is an unbudgeted item for this year, but we are asking for approval of an upset limit of $5,000 to do those modifications to the existing septic system so that we can keep it open for the remainder of the season and give us more time to do a full evaluation as to whether we need to start budgeting for a full replacement or some improvements to that septic system.
Thanks, Joe. Any questions? I don't think we really do have an option. So recommendations before you, Laurie and Sharon?
Waldron Sands,
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
McMillan.
Yes.
Noble.
Yes.
Stribosh,
Yeah,
Trudeau,
Yes,
Wilson.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
And that motion passes.
Moving down to item E, proposed draft plan of subdivision for Sandy Mountain subdivision.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just gonna, I think it's easier again if I take control of the clicker to present this one. I think under normal planning and regulations reports, we've got a good planning process in the area that we typically have our concerns addressed before application submission. So a lot of the times I just submit our plan commenting letters as part of the monthly report. This is one plan of subdivision that we thought we'd provide a little bit of background to the board and get your support on the commenting letters that we intend to supply to the city. So this is the Sandy Mountain subdivision. It's also referred to the area one urban area expansion area in the city of St. Thomas. So this is one that's been several years of ongoing planning that we've been involved with from the onset from consultations. You can see the overall limits. There's two plans of subdivisions that ultimately, because of two different developers, ultimately coincide with one large scale development in the city. You can see it's bound by a tributary of Dodge Creek Valley land to the north. And then we've got Dodge Creek and some floodplain lands to the south. We've got some pretty steep, deep valley lands here, and then the valley corridor of the water course to the center. One of the primary concerns from the onset is this is that valley land feature to the north of the water course that meanders through it. We've got a pretty large substantial gully feature that's here. It has been typical practice that we work with developers through engineering to correct any historical agricultural runoff gully, to stabilize those lands to allow for development. And this is one where I think from the onset, the developers had a proposal to fill in the entire ravine system and use it for stormwater management purposes, which is contrary to our policy. So it's considered hazard lands, it's significant valley land. We don't support storm ponds going into these features. From the onset, they had it proposed to be completely filled in and lost. From a perspective that ravine is about 30 feet deep and 100 feet wide, and lengthwise it's probably about 150 feet. So it's a pretty significant valley land feature as part of that valley land. So we've been expressing concerns throughout the full planning process, and however, the developers continue to provide draft plans with the storm pond in that feature. Most recently, we've had some discussions with the municipality. We met with city staff to see if we could come up with a solution or a compromise or an agreeable, what is the extent of what we may be able to support in terms of intrusion into that valley land. On your screen, you can see a cross section 1B, 1C. Those are just general reference points that when we went back to an earlier technical study that was done, they identified that the location of 1C was generally an area where the lands kind of landward of that section, there was heavy evidence of agricultural runoff and erosion and impacts from the field, while the lands further into the ravine after 1C are more significant natural valley lands with that's eroded. So the original concept was that the pond shouldn't go past 1C. Through further studies, they ended up proposing the pond to come to 1B with some outlet restoration all the way down to the base of the ravine, basically still filling it all in. So when this was circulated out for that proposal, we met again with the city of St. Thomas and with the city of St. Thomas planning and engineering staff. We agreed that we would accept intrusion of the pond up to 1C as kind of a solution or a compromise to move forward with the planning and development of the subdivision while respecting that scientific data that supported it, and that we would allow the outlet restoration or erosion control works to happen between 1C and 1B. So ultimately, after development, the ravine would come up to 1C with some stabilization works in here. What we got on the plan of subdivision was close. They came back with some modifications. You can see 1C on the plan here. They still have the pond going further in to about halfway with the outlet there. So staff continued to raise concerns that it's not supportive with our policies. It's not supportive with the resolutions that was agreed to, and that we felt further design measures should move forward. This is what was circulated as part of the draft plan circulation. Since that time, engineering staff at the city have been working with the consulting engineer where they came up with a solution where they felt that some minor red line revisions, they could pull the pond back to 1C as required. without impacting any of the development lands around it. I think that was the developer's primary concern. They wanted to maintain the number of houses and not lose it by the pond. So I believe we have a resolution that staff can generally support, that meets the agreed upon solution. It just wasn't circulated in the draft plan. So that was one issue that I believe we've been working on for a few years. But through draft conditions, we want to continue to work to ensure that that 1C, that cross section 1C is respected in all of the design drawings moving forward. One of the other issues we have, and this is a similar diagram that we looked at for the hearing today. When we look at defining erosion hazard limits adjacent to ravines, there's 3 different allowances that the province looks at: toe erosion, stable slope, and then erosion access. Historically, as planning processes evolve, at one time, property ownership went to the toe-less slope, it evolved to the top-less slope, it evolved to the stable slope allowance, and subdivisions in the 90s, 2000s, this erosion access allowance here at the top generally was permitted in private ownership, and then municipalities would put zoning on those lands that no buildings or structures can be built in them. Unfortunately, over the years, that's proven to be unsuccessful. In a lot of older areas of those subdivisions, we see sheds, we see pools, we see all kinds of development happening in that erosion hazard limit, and it's difficult to enforce. So what I'm getting to is, over the years, we worked with the municipalities to evolve that planning process again. And on new subdivisions today, at a minimum, the rear lot line is at the edge of that erosion hazard limit. What's happening here on this subdivision, for the majority of those ravine lands, the developers respected that process. But along the south end, you can see here, this purple dashed line is the erosion hazard limit. And on this portion of the ravine, they respected that process, and they're not doing any lot creation in the erosion hazard limit. However, all of these yellow highlighted lands is lot creation in erosion hazard lands, which isn't consistent with PPS. It's not consistent with official plan policies or conservation authority policies. So this is an issue that we're still identifying, that lots should be amended or revised, or further study and rationale provided as to why they can't avoid lot creation in hazard lands. The final, one other concern we have is this block 80, and this is right along the roadway where you may have seen some tree cutting historically on the slope. This block, I believe, has already been sold to a developer for a high density apartment building. Again, it has an erosion hazard limit that crosses into the block, but they're proposing a lot configuration that goes down the slope beyond the erosion hazard limit. So again, not consistent with the current practice, or not consistent with PPS. Within the planning justification report with this subdivision, they identified that there may need to be significant grading on that property, which is going to change the lines. However, their own planning justification report acknowledges that it's premature to zone those lands in yellow residential until that second phase of studies and review is identified. So in their own planning justification report, they're not zoning these lands for residential until that subsequent process happens. And I think from the Conservation Authority's perspective, we use the same argument to say that the limit of development shouldn't be defined now, that they should modify that line to avoid the erosion hazard limit, keep this as a separate block that could be further considered in the future, but not shown as a limit of development right now. So we've identified in the commenting letter that we have this, the construction of the stormwater management facility in significant valley lands is inconsistent with their policies. Lot creation within erosion hazard limits resulting in fragmentation of hazard lands is contrary to several policies. Significant grading and use of stabilization works as a means to adjust the erosion hazard limit for increased development. Again, that's not consistent with the official plan or KCCA properties. The other thing is they make reference to a future asphalt trail within the ravine. So having to grade and alter hazard land slopes for the purposes of a multi-use asphalt trail. There are asphalt trails proposed up in the development lands. We have concerns with the significant grading and works that would have to happen to meet an asphalt ravine trail. So what we've done is, I believe I've listed, and I apologize for the size of the font on the screen, but it was in your advanced package in the letter. I believe we have provided a list of conditions that will hopefully continue the dialogue to have these issues resolved, but allow the draft plan process to proceed. So in condition 1, it's a standard condition that we're having them double up, confirming that permits will be obtained from the Conservation Authority prior to development on our lands. We're asking that all of the stormwater management reports and blocks for the plan be revised to respect that 1C cross section, which is consistent with the red line drawing they've already submitted to us. It's just not recognized in the planning documents. Same with the block for the stormwater management pond to be revised to that 1C. As an option for the erosion hazards, we are asking that those lots be revised to avoid fragmentation of hazard lands. Or we're willing to continue discussions and ask for the applicant to provide rationale or justification why they can't avoid that erosion hazard limit, and to provide strong assurances through mitigation measures how no buildings or structures will occur in there. And if we can't come to an agreement, then we'd be looking for those lots to be revised and remain out of the hazard lands. Finally, similar to the planning justification report that was submitted with the subdivision, we're asking for the limits of development of block 80 to be amended to coincide with the open hazard limit, and that those expansion lands be left as hazard lands until such time there's a subsequent application and necessary studies to proceed with them. And then finally, to address the ravine trail, we're asking that they consider the trail component within the ravine to be designed as a hiking trail, and which is consistent with the City of St. Thomas Trail and Parks Master Plan. They have a category for hiking trail, which would mean it would be a natural surface hiking trail similar to the trails that we have on our lands. So they're less intrusive. They're not using heavy machinery within the ravine in order to create a wide asphalt trail. So through this process, we just wanted to quickly summarize. We've been negotiating and expressing concerns over the years of the development of this. Some of our concerns are still not resolved, but we believe through draft conditions that we can hopefully continue to allow. We know the importance of that development and keep it moving. So we are proposing these 5 conditions as part of draft plans, so we can keep the dialogue moving and move towards a resolution so that development can proceed. So we did permit the draft letters were in the advanced package. They both basically mirror each other, other than some components don't affect the other. So we are asking for today a direction or a motion from the board that the draft KCCA letters of June 19th regarding Sandy Mountain subdivision, draft plans 34T, 23501 and 23502 be approved for submission to the City of St. Thomas.
Thanks, Joe. Questions? Go ahead.
Through the chair. So far, we have no reason why they can't comply with. So it's not covenants of the development or zoning square meter minimum requirements in the lots. Like, we don't know any reason why they.
I mean, I can make some assumptions that typically on these types of subdivisions, the ravine blocks are owned by the developer, and that hazard land gets formed as part of the ravine block. In this case, on the south side, majority of that ravine slope is owned by the adjoining neighbor. So it's hard to merge that erosion hazard limit into that ravine block because they don't have ownership. So that's why I kind of included that alternative option, is to provide the rationale or background as to why they can't meet it. And if there's ways that to our satisfaction could overcome the issues that we have with it. So I did try to write it as there's 2 conditions there for an option, either amend it or let's have further dialogue and give us your justification as to why it can't be met, which I believe is more related to a landowner ownership. But I would say there's still some argument where there's still some connectivity like this side that can connect into this block and things like that. So again, the conditions were written and hopefully that because through the draft plan, if the city agrees to those conditions and imposes them, before final approval, we have to sign off as an authority that those conditions have been met. So it gives us another opportunity to work through the discussions and ensure that our concerns are met prior to final approval of the subdivision.
Go ahead, Jeff.
To the chair. So you were saying, you're telling us, and we know, but there's 2 developers, right? Are they all on board with each other with these concerns, or is there one concern that bothers more than the other?
No, so there are 2 separate landowners, 2 separate subdivisions, but they've been working jointly on one comprehensive plan. So it's really one subdivision, but because of 2 separate ownerships, it's 2 separate plans. So the concerns generally relate to both. There's
yeah. Okay, that's okay. Thank you.
Any other, go ahead, Josh.
Through your chair, that picture that you had up there, Joe, is that all in St. Thomas? Or is the Valley Land Southwold?
It's all in St. Thomas.
It's all in St. Thomas. Okay.
Oh, go ahead, Sam.
Okay, so they're gonna need a section 28 permit in any event, is that correct?
Correct, for any of the development along the edge of the valley lands and for the storm pond, they need a section 28 permit, yes.
So wouldn't it behoove them to really try to cooperate with us to meet the conditions ahead of time so that additional procedure not be needed?
I would agree.
My,
Well,
my,
I'd
wor-
say,
my worry is that given the political reality of the situation, they may feel emboldened enough to simply ignore our concerns, thinking they can, run to the ministry and get their permit if we decide not to give it.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, I think we shared similar concerns in the negotiation process. And that's why, like, especially with the storm pond, I felt that we came to a compromise and a solution with city staff to address this component. And I think we can continue to dialogue with the city staff and the consultants to hopefully try and come to a compromise or a resolution with these areas here. I think there's enough facts in the history of the evolution of planning that says this is an issue. This causes issues in the future that are unmanageable, and that's kind of the reason why we should be sticking to amending those lots to stay outside of the erosion hazard limit. One of the things I recognized in the letter, one of the importance of why we should be encouraging that more now is now because 160 square foot accessory buildings no longer require permits under the building code or the Conservation Authorities Act. And we know 160 foot building can easily be converted into a bunker without knowledge, right? So there are higher risks. So we did I am kind of still standing my ground that it should be revised, but providing an opportunity through the conditions that if they want to make an argument, we're willing to come to the table and discuss, but they haven't made that argument to date. So I tried to form the conditions in a way that would continue dialogue and hopefully come to a resolution prior to final approval.
Do you need some indication from this board of support? I think it's really important that you stick to your position on this. And while you're indicating that you're willing to compromise, I just think there's a line that you cannot cross. Do you need something further from the board to support you?
I would think that if the motion on the screen right now is passed, we can include that either in the submission email or we can amend the letter to acknowledge that the motion of the board to show the support.
Could we do that?
yeah, we can do that. As amended.
Yeah, so how do we, what language would we put in there? Anybody, Elizabeth?
I'm just saying, you approved the submission to the city of St. Thomas, the recommendations, Joe's recommendations are included in that letter, but you could say something like in that the board directs staff not to sway from those recommendations without further consultation with the board. I don't know if something like that works or if you want to be stronger, but.
I like that because I just want to make it clear that if in the end the minister entertains permit, that we have maintained our due diligence and our integrity, and it's going to be on the minister. And I just really would appreciate having that additional language in there, because I also think it might strengthen our staff's hand a little bit.
Everybody comfortable with that around the table?
So basically, I have the motion on the screen that the draft letters be approved for submission, and further that staff be directed to stay firm to the recommendations within the letter without first coming back to the board for further direction.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, to the chair, Elizabeth, to the chair. So are we suggesting that the letter be amended, to include this?
What I'm saying is trying to give wording that the board firmly supports the recommendations within the letter and are directing staff to make no further concessions without first bringing them back to this board for consideration.
Okay, we might even be stronger and say that, knowing what the board knows now, the board wouldn't be inclined to accommodate a lot of a lot of compromise. And I don't know, I'm speaking for me, I don't know if I'm speaking.
Well, I guess it's a question for Elizabeth. So when you're calling the vote, it's basically a recorded vote at that point.
Mhm.
And I'm suggesting that it'd be a recorded vote.
Okay.
They understand that's most likely going to be unanimous on the board that's strongly supported. It's unanimous, right?
Yeah, okay.
And it's recorded. Jim, go ahead.
Through the chair, can the builders actually start putting houses farther back on before this is all compromised, all decided, or do they actually have to wait till everything is installed?
No, so through the planning process, what will happen now is the municipality will consider approving the draft plan with a list of conditions. And then there's a certain time period that the developer has to satisfy conditions. So similarly, the city's gonna ask for a development agreement. Things like that, all that has to be established before they start building houses. So I took that into consideration. I believe the conditions allow the process to go, but still requires dialogue and communication with Kettle Creek to resolve the issues prior to the final. And then that's when it happens.
Yeah, thank you.
There's nothing in this, John, that might trigger an appeal to the OLP from the developers.
I don't think so. I think all of this should be a surprise. And I guess the other caveat is the city still has to agree to implement these conditions in it. If they don't include these conditions, then I would be bringing it back to this board to make decisions how we want to proceed. I mean, the board, conservation authorities still have appeal rights, which I don't know if that's the best approach, but it's an option to assess at the time. And then I think ultimately, we still have regulatory control, even if the city proceeds. The only thing where we would lose from planning approval to regulatory control is how we create lots. So creating lots is only a planning act matter, not a conservation authorities act matter. So once the lots are created, there's not much we can do from the Conservation Authorities Act perspective, but in terms of building on those lots, building the stormwater management plan, building the trail, we still maintain the regulatory authority that they have to get a permit before they can start that work.
Then I think that the board's on the right track. So, okay, thank you.
Okay,
So just for clarification, the recommendation is that the draft PCA letters of June 19th, 2024 regarding Sandy Mountain subdivision draft plans 34T 23501 and 35T 23502 be approved for submission to the city of St. Thomas. And further, that KCCA staff be directed to stay firm to the recommendations outlined in the letters without first reporting back to the board.
and this will be a recorded vote.
Yeah, I'll move to.
Moved by Moved by Strybosh, seconded
Second by Sharon.
McMillan. It's a recorded vote. Baldwin Sands.
Yes.
Herbert.
Yes.
McMillan.
Yes.
Noble.
Yes.
Strybosh.
Yes.
Trousseau.
Yes.
Wilson.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes,
And that motion passes unanimously.
thank you, Joe. Next, June planning and regulations, report from Joe as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just looking for receipt of the staff report that was in the advanced package on planning approvals and permits issued since the last meeting.
Any questions for Joe? You see anything outstanding? Okay, not, we have a recommendation that the planning regulations activity report for June be received. Second, please. Sharon and John. Strybosh, that is.
Baldwin Sands.
Yes.
Herbert.
Yes.
McMillan.
Yes.
Noble.
Yes.
Strybosh.
Yes.
Trousseau.
Yes.
Wilson.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
And that motion carries.
And next closed session, welcome, we go on a closed session. John Wilson. Vogel. All in favor? Oh, just can't do that.
Baldwin Sands.
Yes.
Herbert,
Yes.
McMillan,
Yes.
Noble,
Yes.
Strybosh.
Yes.
Trousseau,
Yes,
Wilson,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
And we stand in closed session at 11:37.
Here. They need a break.